Well, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us here on Close-Ups at the Harbor Media Studio. Thanks for being here today.
You're welcome.
For those who may not know you, would you mind introducing yourself?
My name is Robert Olsson. I'm the fire chief for the town of Hingham.
For a little while longer.
For a little while longer, until February of 2018, when I'll have to retire because I'm going to be hitting mandatory retirement age.
How long has the mandatory retirement age been in effect?
That I can't answer you, except that it was put into effect to see that we always had fit people in public safety. And maybe it's kind of a legislative thing, but it's been pretty much adhered to by everybody.
Of course.
And I started with the fire department back in 1976, so it'll be 41 years. That's a long career.
It's a very long career. And before I even go further, thank you for your service to the town of Hingham.
It's been a pleasure.
All those 40 years, were you working in Hingham?
Yes. I started working with the fire department back in October of 1976 in the town of Hingham.
Wow.
Kind of interesting how I got to the fire service, because I had left home with an interest in science and went away to Rensselaer Polytech to become an engineer. And I graduated from Rensselaer Poly in 1975, and unfortunately there were not many jobs available in 1975, so what do you do when you graduate from college and there's no jobs? You go to graduate school. So I went to graduate school at Worcester Polytech in Worcester.
A little closer to home.
A little closer to home, a little farther away from my girlfriend.
Oh.
But anyway, in the civil engineering building, because I was working for soils and foundation department, because that's what I was interested in at the time. And there were all these burnt chairs and couches and stuff in the basement of the civil engineering building. So I'm kind of like, why are all this burnt furniture down here? That's Professor Fitzgerald. He works for doing a special project for Factory Mutual Insurance Company, which is in Norwood, Massachusetts. And he's kind of interested in this fire science thing. So I kept doing what I was doing, but gradually my interest in those burnt chairs and couches got a little bit stronger. And when I would go to the library, I'd start reading Fire Engineering and NFPA magazine instead of Geotechnical Soils. And it was kind of like a light went on in my head, and I decided that that's what I wanted to do. So it kind of a roundabout way, I took the civil service exam, and then there was some controversy at the time, so it was a delayed exam. They were supposed to have one in '73, but they didn't actually get it done until late '75. So I actually finished quite high on the list and actually was offered a job, and I decided I'm going to take it. So I left Worcester Poly and joined the fire department.
As the head of emergency preparedness, I'm sure you work very closely with the police, and you have a unique relationship with the police chief.
Yeah, I do. It's kind of interesting that my brother Glenn, my younger brother Glenn, actually joined the police force. He was always kind of a people type person, where I was a little bit more the techie type. And a lot of the friends, the people that he hung around with, were involved in the police force. So he chose the police force. I actually got on the fire department before he got on the police force, but
so you started the family trend.
I started the family trend, but I thought it was the family trend, but there's a lot of other history on my mother's side of the family, with relatives being Brookline firefighters, and also policemen in Milton, Mattapan, and Boston. So it was always there. I just never really recognized it as a kid growing up. So it seemed interesting to me at the time. And it just kind of grew from there. At one time, I was on the fire department. My brother Dave was on the fire department, and my brother Glenn had just gotten on the police department. And I can still remember the call that we went to on Main Street, where all three of us were there. I think that was the first time that ever happened, because I also worked on the ambulance for the Hingham Fire Department. So my brother Dave was on Engine 7, out of South Station, and Brother Glenn showed up in the police cruiser. And it was really funny because like Dave and myself were kind of trying to protect my brother Glenn, you know, from having to see the incident that we were at, because it was not that good of an incident. But that was the first time that all three of us were together on a call.
He was probably like, I just get out of my way. I got to do my job.
Yeah, it was funny. We talk about it now because it was so long ago.
Yeah. That is so neat. I mean, it's lovely that your family has those strong ties to the South Shore and has stayed near each other.
Yeah, I mean, my family moved to Hingham in 1960 in South Hingham on Amber Road next to the town forest. Not exactly sure why public service kind of became a thing that we got interested in. I think naturally, I think it goes back to some of the things that your parents taught you, you know, when you were young.
Core values.
Core values. I think also our involvement in Boy Scouts played a significant part in the Boy Scout law, Boy Scout oath, that played a significant part in when I grew up. My father was an Eagle Scout. I'm an Eagle Scout. My brother Glenn's an Eagle Scout. My brother Dave's an Eagle Scout. So it's kind of, I think those kind of values, they somehow or other get inside you, and you're always looking for ways to do something that is going to satisfy that particular need of public service.
That takes a lot of work, right, to become an Eagle Scout?
Yeah, it did at the time.
Probably was quite a while ago.
It's funny now because I look at so many people, you know, I'm an Eagle Scout. My deputy chief is an Eagle Scout. One of my captains is an Eagle Scout. Another one of my captains is an Eagle Scout. Both of them from the same troop that I came from.
Oh.
So it's just kind of interesting how many of those you see. It's one of those things that you when you're older, you don't put a lot of emphasis on, but as you start to meet people and people that you like and that have the same kind of values as you talk to them and you find out you have that in common.
It's like the most honorable fraternity there is. Probably not the right word.
Yeah, well, I belong to several fraternities.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, remember I did go to college, so I did belong to Sigma Alpha Epsilon.
They were at my university. They were
yeah.
some nice gentlemen.
Yep, that was at RPI and also at Worcester Poly, but you know, there's other fraternal organizations I belong to that are involved in the same type of activity. So maybe you're kind of drawn to that because of the way that you grew up and the values that you have.
Absolutely. How did you cope with emotionally distressing situations in the line of work?
I think that's probably the hardest part of the job that nobody, at least in the past, would talk about. We're put in very unusual situations and asked to help wave some kind of magic wand and make everything good. But you can't always do that. Our job is to try to do the best we can for the people who are there to have the best outcome that we can have, but it's not always possible for that. I really can't, you know, all of us that are in public service or public safety have to deal with these kind of things. And usually the way that we deal with them is we recognize them for what they are, and then when we actually get back to the station, we actually have each other to try to help and counsel each other. And that was kind of the way in the past, it kind of always was. But later on, you know, no matter how, everyone has a bucket, and there's only so much that a bucket can carry. And I think the realization in the public safety service now is that we have to be a little bit better at recognizing when someone's bucket's getting full. And part of my job as chief is to be able to kind of identify when that's happening and make sure that the right kind of services are available to people who need them. I think there's more attention given to that today.
Mental health, personal care.
Yeah, I mean, back when I joined the fire department, it was kind of like, hey, just tough it out, kid.
Stiff upper lip.
Yeah,
and through.
So you just kind of like live with that and find ways to deal with it. But it affects your home life a little bit.
Sure.
I had the advantage that my wife was a nurse, So she had issues too at the hospital.
She could empathize.
Yeah, but you know, there are still things that for some reason or another you just bury and you just don't talk about them. There's incidents that I've been on, the only people I will talk to about that incident is the person who was with me when it happened. I've actually taken affectionately to call them my ghosts, and I know that everybody has them, and at certain times and points in your life, the ghosts are going to come back to visit, and that's just part. I learned early on that there's no such thing as a victimless incident. If someone does something or something happens, everybody that responds to that is actually a victim of that particular incident.
You have a whole exciting world of retirement.
Yeah, I do. I'm actually kind of looking forward to it. My wife has been patiently waiting. When we had a lot of problems coordinating vacations and things like this with our family when she was working at the hospital, because their ability to just let you go on vacation when you want to is the same. It's structured the same way the fire departments was structured. So I'm looking forward to having the freedom now that, hey, I can go. Two of my kids live in Los Angeles and California, so you know, we don't get to see them as often as we should. So I'm really looking forward to spending at least 2 weeks a year with them.
Do they know?
They probably are going, like I said, oh great, Mom and Dad are coming to stay with us for 2 weeks. No, it'll be fine. I miss them because they're so far away, and
Sure.
having the opportunity now to be able to go spend some time with them will be good.
Well, I'm sure there are so many technical aspects of your job. Do you ever go to like open houses or career nights for younger kids? How do you explain what you do in like a sentence?
When you move into the next level, in the command level, it takes on a whole different thing because now you're responsible for the performance of the crews that you have in the field, and you need to be able to watch their safety and make sure that they're doing things properly and setting the strategy and assigning the tactics for them to perform to achieve the objectives. So different parts, it's different. When you get into admin, the primary job in admin is to make sure that the people that are doing the work in the field have all the resources that they need to effectively accomplish the mission, whether it be manpower, funding for training, tools and equipment, apparatus, and that kind of thing.
A ton of work that the public will never see.
No, I know. So can I put it in one sentence?
Not really.
It's not really, because it varies along those 3 different stages, which is kind of the progression that you kind of want to see, you know, in the fire department. The job gets more complex.
I don't think you give yourself enough credit, Buff.
I sometimes will tell people that, hey, I'm just the fire chief. The guys that get the credit are the guys in the field that are actually doing the work. I can't tell you, when I do show up at a call, they're like, oh great, the chief's here. You want to step aside, chief? Let us do our job. Yeah, but I kind of laugh at that because I was doing that for so long. But to watch the people on my department work at a scene, there's a certain kind of sense of pride that you get when you see that, how effective they are and how good they are.
Sure.
And to me, that's probably one of the most rewarding things I have as fire chief, is actually watching my people work. They amaze me.
And you have a bit of a say in their future as you help search for the new chief, right?
Yeah, I mean, part of leadership, I've always thought that you should always be looking for your replacement and always training people. One of the things I think that doesn't happen enough is you need to always be looking behind you or looking backwards to see who's behind you. And I remember when I started and I was interested in certain things, you know, how many times that I was told, no, you can't do this, or no, we're not going to do that, or hey, that's a stupid idea. And I just kept knocking on the door because I'm a little stubborn that way. Maybe it's the Scotch in me, I don't know. But anyway, I always said to myself, if I have an opportunity in the leadership position, I don't want to be that guy that is stifling someone else's ability to grow. I want to be able to afford them the opportunity. Okay, let's try that.
Let's talk about it.
Do you want to get involved in that? Let me set you up so we can go do this. And encouraging people to do things. I think that way you find out too in your staff those people that are going to be carrying the ball forward, and then you want to look at them and develop them and give them opportunities of growth so that when it's their turn to step up, they'll be the people who step up. But it doesn't stop there because, as I mentioned before when we were talking about in one sentence describe it, and I said there's kind of like 3 different phases. You know, in the fire service, there's always those moving from the firefighter ranks to the lieutenant ranks to the captain ranks to the deputy and maybe eventually to chief. But we should be assisting people that want to move forward, be able to do that by providing the education, the opportunities, and not saying no to them, but say yes. At least that was my experience, you know. I heard too many no's. Fortunately, I kept up and just kept pushing a little bit.
You just decided not to listen.
Well, yeah, okay. So.
It worked out. No, that's a good thing.
Well, I'll tell you, just in a little bit of trivia here, everyone gets a nickname in the fire department. So you don't really have it made until you get a nickname.
I'm so excited.
What?
To hear yours.
Well, my nickname was I Know. And I think it came from when we used to do the training classes, and the person leading the training classes would ask the question. I would always, I know. So gradually, because I studied the fire service because of that interest that I had back at Worcester Poly.
Yeah.
And I would read the magazines, and I would ask the question, why are we doing it this way? So I was always kind of challenging myself to figure out or think a little bit differently. That caused me some problems, but at the same time, that ended up being my nickname. So, and it's one I kind of bear with honor because I remember the first time that we're sitting in the watch office and someone said, "Hey, did you hear what the I Know did?" And then everyone realized I was standing there, and everyone's like, "Uh-oh, you just said it." And I started laughing, and then from that day on, it was the I Know, and it was good.
The I Know. That's such a good nickname. Oh, that's really good.
Well, formerly they used to say I.J. Know, because James is my middle initial on my name. So, yeah. But you know, I mean, I kind of carry that as a badge of honor. It's a little bit of individual trivia, but it's kind of unique.
That's a very good story. How have you been involved in this search and the eventual selection of the new fire chief?
Well, as fire chief, part of your job is to set the strategic goals for the department and how the different individual goals that you're going to do to achieve that strategic goal. And so when I'm looking for the next person to replace me, I kind of viewed my job, because of the time frame that I had, as being a bit of a transitional chief. And years ago, when I started working with the different people in the department, I knew a lot of these guys because I was actually on the department when they joined the department. So I had a chance to watch and see people's development. I think the person that's been selected to be chief when I leave, Steve Murphy, I knew him from my early days on working in the ambulance. Because Steve worked on the paramedic unit out of South Shore Hospital. So on serious calls where we needed paramedic intervention, Steve would show up. So I knew of Steve from that relationship, that we had a work relationship on the EMS side. And then when he joined our department, he eventually advanced, and because of his experience and knowledge in EMS, eventually became an EMS coordinator. I've always said fire department has 2 masters. We have to answer to the town for the things that we do on the fire side, and we have to answer to Department of Public Health for the things that we do on the EMS side. So there's actually 2 different masters that we have to kind of play with. And the EMS coordinators have a very, very difficult job in coordinating all the EMS activities, the training, the policies, the ambulance setup, the ambulance inspections, and coordinating complaints and stuff like that that either come from Department of Public Health, Office of Emergency Medical Services, or from the hospital. And in working with the hospital, we always operate under what's called medical control. Our medical control comes from Dr. Olsson, who's the head of the ED at South Shore Hospital. So the the EMS coordinators work between the fire administration and all these other organizations because they're the ones that are actually doing the work in the field and have the most experience to be able to do this effectively. It was during that time as deputy chief, I was working on the EMS side with the EMS coordinators that I realized that Steve Murphy was a little bit of an exception to the rule. He had the educational background, he had the professionalism, which he demonstrated numerous times in handling issues on the EMS side. And he also started to develop himself as a Hingham Fire Department officer through being a lieutenant and eventually being a captain, and also extended his education beyond that by actually getting a master's degree in public administration and doing the chief fire officer's course. And actually he went out and became the first Hingham firefighter to be certified or accredited to be a fire chief. So these things are kind of interesting in that, you know, I think his eventual goal was to get into the management side. And when he became my deputy, I had a chance to work even closer with him than I had when we were the EMS coordinator and deputy chief. And I think that helped establish the relationship between us, that I helped develop the fire department's strategic plan with Steve, and one of the big things I'd like to see continued forward is for the fire department to follow that strategic plan. We're trying to look 5, 10, 15 years ahead of now, saying what do we see coming? How do we see the development of the town going? What are the needs that are going to be placed on the fire service? How are we going to meet those needs? What direction do we need to move in now so that we're not going in the opposite direction when we need to be here? And the only way you can do that is by evaluating and instituting a strategic plan and then sticking with that plan. And Steve's been instrumental in developing that with me over the 2 years that I had to do it. And I think he will be the best person to take that plan forward. So,
please tell me more about the upcoming construction in the town of Hingham and how that might affect the fire department.
One of the things when I became fire chief that I wanted to take a look at is a lot of times when building developments are planned, they go through the planning board. They go through the zoning board of appeals if they need to, and then the plan is established and the building is built. Once the building is built, fire department has to protect that building for the next 50, 60 years, however long that building's going to be there. It always seemed funny to me that we didn't have more of a say or more of a part in the planning of all these developments. So when I became chief, I took a more active role in getting the fire department involved in the fire prevention side, the fire planning side of these developments, working with the planning board on such simple site things as fire department access. If we have an emergency, how do we access this development? How do we access these houses? If you don't do it early in the planning stages and get it part of the planning board's recommendations, then they're going to go ahead and build it, and you're going to have to live with it.
And play catch up, really.
Yeah, or if you're going to let them build streets that your apparatus can't make the turn on, you need to be a little bit more proactive and take a broader picture. The first duty of every fireman is to prevent the outbreak of fire. So fire prevention should play a very important part in everything that we do. And one of the ways to do that is to get involved in the planning process for these developments. Town of Hingham has undergone quite a transition, especially in the last couple of years. There's only so much open land and only so many single-family dwellings you can have. Hingham is a very stable, a very good community, has good public safety, it has good services, it has good schools, and people want to live in that environment and experience that. But to do that, not everyone can have a single-family home because the demand for housing is higher than the housing thing is. The way that you do this is by adding in these multi-unit or what we call multifamily dwellings. So we've seen a lot of those crop up. I mean, we look at the Linden Ponds development, which is basically for the over 55 group, but on total build out, that's 10% of the population of the town of Hingham living in one development. We're seeing the same thing happening along the Route 3A corridor now with the new buildings that we see going up in the shipyard, and now the new building that's going to go up on Lincoln Street, the proposed buildings that we see going up off of Beale Street. One of the changes in construction that we're seeing now is a lot of buildings used to be built with steel, cement. We're seeing a lot of wood frame buildings now.
Really?
Yeah. And wood frame buildings in the state can be 4 or 5 stories high. And even though these are protected by sprinkler systems, once they're installed and built out, they're still wood frame buildings. Wood burns. So for the fire service, this is a particular challenge as we start to look at a different building system with these 4 and 5 story wood frame buildings. And how are we, as a fire department, going to be able to protect the people who live in them? And that's a challenge that we're still working on. It's a big challenge because I see that as being the single biggest thing that is going to be happening in the town of Hingham as more and more of these developments to have additional housing added to the town of Hingham. They're all going to be these multi-unit dwellings. We just had a fire recently over in Weymouth involving one of these 4-story wood frame buildings, and it was ended up being a total loss. It was 85% completed, supposed to be occupied in October. Hingham responded there on a second alarm, and we basically lost the building. So that's the first time that's happened near us, but it's happened in Waltham where they lost 5 buildings that were under construction. And because of the nature of these buildings being wood frame, the most dangerous time in their construction is during the construction phase. Construction and remodeling are the 2 areas where building fires are more likely to occur. So they present kind of a challenge to us because it's a different thing than we're used to dealing with.
Right.
And we're going to have to look at that, and we're going to have to change maybe the way that we respond to those things to do it in a better, more effective, and safer manner. Not just for the residents, but for the firefighters involved in it as well.
Or we can lobby HGTV to bring stone homes back in fashion.
Fred and Barney would be very excited about that, but I don't think we can go backwards in our society. I think like everything, we always learn to step forward. We think sometimes we take a step backwards, but we really don't. We're always advancing. We're always moving forward. Someone once said the only constant in the universe is change, and I believe that that's true. And that's why, as the fire chief, I can't ever sit idle and just say, we're all set, everything's going to be good, because the world around us is changing, which means we need to change with it.
Well, that is very profound.
Yeah,
Is it scary
maybe
or
that was my
optimistic?
grandfather again, coming through.
Grandy had some pearls of wisdom.
He did.
Well, on that note, I think that's all the time we have. But thank you again for your service all the years at Hingham and for coming here today.
Thank you for the time to talk about it.
See you around.
Okay.